evening, everyone, and welcome to each and every one of you to today's program. Another episode of Spill the Facts, produced by the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly, Guyana's Youth Committee. Now, the last few weeks have been a bit overwhelming with the untimely death of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd that has left so many people, not only in America, but the entire world, in mourning and also angry and frustrated. I mean, it's hard enough dealing with COVID-19, but the world now grapples with racism and anti-Blackness. I do applaud IDPADA-G for this timely and relevant discussion, as we have all seen the news and what's been happening. So tonight's discussion will be focused on confronting anti-Blackness in 2020, the African female experience. I am Kayshell Jennings, and along with the amazing Zoe Frank, we will be your moderators for tonight's discussion. Zoe, over to you.
Thank you, Kayshell. This episode of Spill the Facts also marks the launch of the IDPADA-G Youth Committee docuseries on the Black experience. Our topic tonight, Confronting Anti-Blackness in 2020, the African female experience. So before we begin, we have our very own IDPADA-G CEO, the beautiful Miss Olive Sampson, who will be giving us some brief remarks.
I want to thank Zoe for that very kind introduction, and thank the Youth Committee for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to participate in this forum, the first in a series where we will address the question of anti-Blackness. It's timely in that here we are, focused as we are, the International Decade for People of African Descent. And we are confronted finally with an opportunity that we must seize to change the narrative. First, let me say good evening to the panelists and audience. I want to thank the Youth Committee for creating an opportunity tonight for us to focus on questions that define our very existence as women, as people of African descent, not only in Guyana, but across the world. Thanks to all for joining in. Thanks to the amazing panel for joining in on this discussion and for sharing your thoughts as we go through the evening. George Floyd's barbaric death indeed removed blinders and destroyed the lens through which we used to see the world. Since then, we have a whole new way of articulating our pain and recognizing our reality. His brutal murder reminds us of the over 400 young Black men assassinated by the Phantom Squad here, men and women, and of the Linden martyrs who were peacefully protesting, and so many, many, many more. These horrific events all emanate from the same place. All have their roots in a single system. They are instructive to us. As I said before, they remove the blinders and they cannot be forgotten. They must not be forgotten. The odious narrative that was constructed by white imperialists, white supremacists, to justify the domination and enslavement of Africans and the wholesale theft of our patrimony on the continent and in the colonies they created was the origin of a system. What began in the 16th century, supported by a cleverly crafted, ubiquitous narrative, still undergirds the system that continues today. It is a system intent on the destruction of African humanity, African history, African belief systems, the African body. And we must never think for a moment that that system is any different from the way it was first implemented. It is the anti-Black system. We might have been, I think, a little bit distracted by the use of the term racism. And racism might describe the microaggressions that we experience daily, the slights, the discrimination in employment, the insults from shop owners. But that racism is just a small part of an endemic global anti-Black system that remains at the core of our nations and of all nations, domestic and international relations. It affects all of us as Black people individually, in our communities, whether they are communities here in Guyana, certainly all across the world, in all of our nations, in the entire diaspora. And one look at gross disparities in healthcare recently in the United States revealed the impact of COVID-19 in the United States. It makes the community impact apparent. The disparities are apparent. It showed that people of African descent were more impacted, more likely to die. And the root causes came out of a system that denied them many, many things that would have helped them to be stronger, to have better access to healthcare, to have better access to good food, etc. We can find examples here in Guyana where we have been slighted, affected by a system that took away our land, that took away jobs from us, starting with the period immediately after emancipation and continuing through today. A system of laws, a bureaucracy that was put in place to deny us our effective rights. That system is also, we see it in international relations. And I was hoping that as people protested, they would have paid attention to how that system affects international relations. The neo-colonialist attitude and the way that former colonies, particularly those headed by Black leaders, are dealt with by the imperialist powers of the North, very clearly show that that anti-Black system is alive and well in international affairs. One example of that, and I know I'm straying from the focus on women, but I wanted to use this platform just to bring to your attention that we are still awaiting comments from the international observers of March 2nd election, the ABCE countries. Their comment about the innocent children that were injured on their way home from school, for no other reason than that they are Black. It was interesting that that occurred just 2 weeks after, in the United States, efforts were tried to hide Ahmaud Arbery's death in late February. Our children were injured in early March. The international community here and their representatives here and their home departments turned a blind eye to those children. Those mothers are still looking for the world while they're laser focused on Guyana's democracy to address the attack on their children because of the color of their skin. So tonight we begin a series on anti-Blackness. What is it? How do we survive it to build a better world for ourselves and for our children? I hope you'll join us on Saturday evening for a special edition of Spill the Facts, where we'll pursue this examination with an incredible panel. And again, next week and in the coming weeks, as we pursue this very critical subject. Keep your eyes on our Facebook page and stay in touch. And remember, racism is a small part of it. The system is anti-Blackness. Thank you for inviting me to join in tonight's conversation. We all have a role to play. We all have a piece to add to this puzzle. And I hope that all of the participants take the time to jot in their questions and to be engaged. We need all hands on deck. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Ms. Sampson. I'm always pleased to listen to you, and I'm sure the viewers, they were even more pleased. Tonight, as part of IDPADA-G's docu-series launch, we've collected a series of videos from all across the world with women sharing their Black experience with us. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
I'm Letitia, and a lot of my experiences as a Black woman with anti-Blackness surrounds the policing of my body and my hair very specifically, particularly throughout my puberty experience, which was a pivotal time for me and any other child when I was in high school, and I felt as if I had to assimilate into a culture. And it was very hard in school, but I put up a lot of resistance against it, and I was meted with a lot of resistance, and I was even penalized heavily for it very often as well. I was embarrassed sometimes, having to stand up in front of the office, in front of assembly, to loose up my hair, to neaten myself, and it took a great toll on me, on my identity, until I straightened my hair because I had given up. And then I guess I got a spark and I reclaimed my identity because I understood what it was for me as a Black woman to wear my natural hair.
Growing up in predominantly Black Caribbean communities, you don't often experience moments of severe racism. You don't experience people throwing racial slurs at you. And that's why it was very difficult for me 4 years ago while I was interning in the United States in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I was crossing the street, and two young white men drove their vehicle very close to me, almost hitting me, to be honest, and they told me to go back to Africa, you monkey. At that point in time, it was very disheartening. I was very disappointed. I didn't know how to feel. I felt very uncomfortable. Bearing in mind, I did not feel that way on a regular basis being in Colorado, or being in Fort Collins, Colorado. The people, they were very warm, they were very cool, they were very hip. It was very disturbing, and I shared it with my internship supervisor, who was an older white man, and he apologized on the behalf of those two young men, and he spoke to their ignorance.
Hello, I'm Bilqis from Somalia, living now in China. My personal experience is nothing comparable to what my brothers and sisters are facing around the globe, but there was some time where I had to apply a job as an English teacher in China. And for the day of interview, the moment I walk into that place we're supposed to have the interview, those people, they told me, oh, they're really sorry, and they found the English teachers that they were looking for. And I was thinking, oh, maybe they already found. But the other day, a friend of mine from Russia, he went for interview for the same job, and he told me they accept him. So that was the moment I realized they didn't find the English teachers, but they didn't expect the idea that the Black person applied for the job. So
my name is Ms.Tamika, and I am the co-founder of Kenton Silk. We're a social enterprise, and we're aiming to change the status quo of Africa-China relations. Anti-Blackness, yes, I have experienced that. And so one example that does come to mind was when I was in a playground just like this, when I first came to China, and this young boy saw me and he just began to cry really, really badly. It was very, very awkward. And this young boy probably didn't even realize, his reaction to me. And, I was thinking, is it based on the fact that I'm Black? Is it based on the fact that he hasn't seen a foreigner before? But the bottom line, there was fear because he saw me and he didn't recognize, me as, I guess, just being another human being. So in that instance, rather than running away, rather than being angry, I just wanted to confront him in a way that would help him to understand that, look, I am still, Miata, a person, and his parents came around and we had a discussion, and, that just reminded me in instances where there is fear, there is ignorance, I just pray for godly wisdom to just how to address those, those issues. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Hi, my name is Olivia Nadine. I'm from the United States, and I currently live in Beijing, China. My experience confronting anti-Black racism is usually relegated more to the daily, what we call microaggressions. The, oh, wow, you speak so intelligently, or, oh, wow, you actually sound really smart, or, oh, wow. Like, it's usually followed by an, oh, wow. but this kind of assumption that the intelligent, smart, clear, eloquent, well-spoken things are a surprise when they come out of my mouth as opposed to someone else's mouth. Or I feeling the need that I have to say that, oh, I have this degree and this degree from this institution and this institution before the conversation actually welcomes me in to join. Thank you.
Those were some really great stories from women all across the world. And if you have been moved to share your story, please do send us a 1-minute story of how you have battled against anti-Blackness to the IDPADA-G Youth Committee Facebook page. We want to share your story with the world. Now it's time for what you've all gathered here for, and it definitely was not to hear me, but to hear the lovely lineup of panelists that we have for our program tonight. And they are by no means short of talent, wealth of experience in their different fields, and amazing Afro-Guyanese women. And it is indeed my privilege to introduce each and every one of them. So this evening, they will each be given 10 minutes to facilitate discussion, to share their story. And afterwards, we will facilitate a question and answer segment. And if you're interested, you have questions, because I know you will, you can utilize the question and answer button below your screen or the chat, and we'll try our best to answer all your questions, or most of them, if not. So tonight's lineup, I'll be sharing all the bios, and our first speaker for today's program will be Ms. Zoe Sarabo. And Zoe is a Guyanese and has been living in the United States since 2005. Zoe attended Arizona State University, where she received her bachelor's degree in history, Africa, and African American studies, and her master's in liberal studies, focusing on borders, migration, and culture. Zoe worked with a community development corporation as an economic development coordinator, where she provided support services to strengthen the economic conditions of the business specifically and larger community. After 3 years, Zoe transitioned to working for a refugee resettlement agency as the lead for the intensive care management program, helping refugees in particularly from the African continent transition to life in Phoenix, Arizona. It was during this time that she decided to start her business designing African-inspired clothing and partnering with African designers and seamstresses to, 1, inspire pride in the culture and love of self, 2, give women the opportunity to earn an income using the talents they have, and 3, create a platform that provides exposure to a larger audience. The Sarabo brand is celebrating 5 years this year and is developing that into a brand that is to be recognized as the brand for African-inspired lifestyle. Wow, wow, wow. We have some amazing people. The next speaker would be the amazing Aisha Haynes. So Aisha is a mentor. Aisha is a mentor, community activist, and youth advocate who ever since she was a preteen has always focused on how she can manage she could make a change in her community, collaborating with many organizations to develop youth engagement. Community activism has been a common thread in her community building and strengthening, being a central part of her childhood experience. Her activism has seen her take up roles as a youth representative for the Global African Congress, the United Nations, university groups across North America, IDPADA-G, ABR, and continues to be a key contributor in the fight for African equity. Aisha volunteers as the coordinator for the annual Emancipation Festival, Youth Community Outreach Programs, and African Business Parity. Her philanthropy is entwined with her mentorship and tutoring of at-risk middle, high school, and university students, which started from her university days and carried forward to her developing similar programs in Guyana. She also runs a boutique and loves promoting youth entrepreneurs through various initiatives. Now I'll hand over to Zoe, who will be introducing the third, but definitely not the final speaker for tonight.
Finally, we have Tamika Henry-Fraser. Tamika Henry-Fraser is a forensic scientist, media personality, CEO of Curlfed Natural Hair and Beauty Expo, and owner of Curly's Natural Hair Store for Kids. She began her career in forensics at the Criminal Investigations Department 10 years ago, before becoming the Deputy Director at Guyana's National Forensic Laboratory. Mrs. Henry-Fraser completed her Master of Science degree at the University of Florida, where her research focused on emergent technologies in DNA analysis and development of Caribbean judicial systems. She currently serves on the executive board of the Caribbean Association of Forensic Scientists and is recognized as a force of change in security and disarmament in Latin America and the Caribbean by the UN. So without further ado, let us welcome our panelists. We'll begin with Ms. Zoe, then Ms. Aisha, then Ms. Tamika.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor to be given the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for the invitation, and even more honored to be in the same panel as with all these amazing other ladies. So thank you. As I thought about what I was going to speak on today, I first wanted to really have a conversation about what anti-Blackness and racism means, because it's not a term that we use frequently, right? So when we're talking about discrimination against large groups of people, discrimination against particular ethnic groups, we use the term racism. And that, for the most part, has become such a broad general term that is applied to any form of oppression that individuals feel, groups of people feel at the hands of others. And so I studied the term anti-Blackness, and I've come to realize why it is so relevant of a term today, because anti-Blackness really lends to the focus of the experiences of Blackness specifically, and not inclusive of all other groups, right? So it forces us to talk about the particular experiences of people of African descent, which is inherently and by nature different from the experiences of others, because we cannot talk about our experiences in a way that other groups can talk about their experiences, and other groups do not have the same experiences as those of us of African descent. So I'm really glad that you guys use the term anti-Blackness, and I think that I may start using that myself much more frequently, as opposed to use the word racism. I might even use both, because I like the bringing together anti-Black racism, because then that is an act of itself of including belief system and stereotypes, but using that position and your power, right, to discriminate against people of African descent specifically. So this is something that I've come to the realization in preparing for this presentation. Now, when we talk about the impact of the African woman, right? How does anti-Blackness affect the African woman? Seeing that I have been living in the United States since 2005, we will now do the math, right? My experiences, for the most part, will lend itself to living within these borders of the United States. So I will not be able to give so much experiences as connected to the Caribbean, even though, you know, being from there, I'm quite aware of what those experiences are like. But I will focus more on, you know, Blackness within the United States. So I live in Phoenix, Arizona. what do we know about Phoenix, Arizona? It is a lovely state. It is a lovely state, but demographically, it's predominantly white, right? So we have a large white population, large Hispanic population. The African population, those of African descent, is I would say about 3 to 4%, maybe rising, maybe increasing, but the number is small. And so for me, in talking about my personal experience moving here a few years ago, right? It was a culture shock, as I can put it, as I'm shifting from a predominantly Afro cultured West Indian background, right, to a state that is predominantly white, to a university, to a campus that is predominantly white. And so that experience really forced me to really come to terms to what my Blackness means, what my Blackness means for me, and what my Blackness means for the other, right, for those who are seeing me. There is one way in which we see and understand ourselves within our a common space, and then there is another way we see ourselves when we're put into an environment that is different from our normal, for what we're used to. And so moving to Arizona and going to ASU really opened my eyes and helped me to answer that question of what does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be Black in America specifically? And what does racism mean, right? I do appreciate this experience, because there is a difference between learning about racism at a distance, right? There's a difference between learning and understanding racism in other contexts at a distance, as opposed to coming face to face in a direct contact of what that means and what that feels like. So it's the experience of being the only Black person in a classroom, right? It's something that became quite common, right? The experience of being taught by white teachers for the first time became the norm. I had before migrating to Arizona, living. I didn't have, we didn't have any white teachers, any white professors, right? Our contact with white individuals was far and in between, and so that was a very different shift for me. And so, in majoring in African and African American studies, really created a home environment where I can feel comfortable and feel connected to the professors and feel that there was a space in which I belonged. And it really helped me to recognize the value of culture and being connected to oneself and one's identity and who you are. It's only until you put in a space in which you're not used to, that your awareness, my awareness and of who I am and my identity was sharpened. So I do appreciate this experience because it really helped me to reinforce what I've known for an extended period of time. I know we have 10 minutes. I can talk forever, so please feel free to stop me when I go over my time. But I'll give a brief experience that I had, and then I will talk about a larger Black experience, Black woman's experience in America. But there was one day I was walking on the road. I think I was still in college. I was in the middle of the day, 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was looking for the post office, actually. So still trying to familiarize myself to the environment, looking for the post office. I think I came off of the wrong stop on the train, and a police officer pulls up next to me. And I turned around, I'm like, hello. And he asked me, so where do you need help? Where are you going? And I'm like, no, I'm good. Don't need help. Just looking for a post office. And he started asking me questions. Do you live around here? Like, why are you at this spot right now? I'm like, yes, I live around here. I live in such and such street, and I just came off the light rail, and I am just trying to figure out where the post office is. And he starts asking me some further questions, like how long I've been living here, who do I live with, and I started becoming uncomfortable. I'm like, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I am just trying to find the post office. Why are you questioning me at this point? And so he's like, well, you know, this street or this corner can be known for certain acts and certain behaviors. And I just wanted to make sure that you didn't need any help, or you weren't in any trouble in any way. And so I was a bit unnerved by that. And I realized that based on my presentation and as I spoke to him, that he changed his mind for whatever perceptions he had of me at that time. And I since then, I've always questioned, should I had a different persona per an appearance, how would he have further responded to me, and why he felt the need to stop me in the middle of the day to find out why I'm walking on the street, you know? So there've been some awkward exchanges that I've had that really have made me uncomfortable in different situations. But in regards to our what's happening currently, right? We're in the midst of the Black Lives Movement, something that a movement that started in response to police brutality in the United States, and as the world, you know, brings attention, it draws further attention to the issue of police violence. I asked the question, we asked the question, how does this impact the African woman? Right? I'm part of a local organization, and we've been having conversation of the fact that women, Black women in particular, are leading for the most part, are on the forefront of this movement, forefront of the protests that are happening across the world. And so the bigger question of what is the motivation? What's the reason? Is it only because it's our husbands that are being killed, our brothers, our fathers, our children? What is the deeper meaning to the women being empowered, but being forced and feeling the need to be on the forefront of this movement? What is the effect of this? Now, we live in a society where there's institutional racism, right? This is racism that was created by whiteness and institutionalized through the policies, the organizations, the institutions that were created to reinforce stereotypes and certain discriminations against the Black body and against Blackness. And so what impact does this have for the Black woman? And so I did some research, and I was able to find some statistics. 700 to 900 women die of pregnancy-related cases within the United States. This is the highest for what we call a developed society, the highest numbers related to Black women dying due to pregnancy-related causes. There are a series of reasons for this, but the main reasons is how racism affects the communities, right? How women are coping and dealing with the stresses of poverty and that's linked to institutional racism, right? They're not able to successfully go through a pregnancy without it having some significant impact on their health and on their body. Another stark statistic would be more than 62% of Black women work, which makes them the only group of women with a higher participation rate than their male counterpart. They earn less than almost every other group in the nation, and 28% of Black women have jobs that are in the service roles, which have the lowest wages. They do not have access to insurance, and that affects ability to be able to provide for childcare, be able to afford childcare, right? And Black women are twice as likely to be in prison as their white counterpart. So these are really, really serious, stark statistics that reflect, in a nutshell, how institutional racism and anti-Blackness affects the woman specifically. So now in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, with our Black men, our Black brothers, our husbands, our sons being killed, right, being imprisoned at higher rates, the effect that this have on the community, effect that this has would have on the family, then really stresses the Black woman even more. So if you remove that Black man from the family, if you remove that Black man from the community by imprisonment or death, right? The person who probably most likely was providing for the family, right? Taking care of the children, supporting, playing that supportive role in the family, that burden and responsibility now is put on the hands of the mother, of the wife, you know, who now has to take that burden of responsibility of taking care of the home. Now that then further puts her into a position economically, which stresses her out even more, right? So that feeds into all of the statistics that I just mentioned in regards to access to quality of jobs, being able to pursue higher education that may have been stopped, access to a better job that can provide insurance. And so there is a reverberating effect of police violence, of the high incarceration rates of the men, right? So it forces us as women to really be on the forefront of this movement, because we know how it affects us, how it impacts our community and our family in the long run if we don't do it. So this is, I just thought that I would speak on, you know, the direct effect, focusing primarily on the Black Lives Matter movement and how the Black woman is affected and why she has no choice but to be on the forefront and making sure that this issue is brought to the attention of the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zoe. Just a reminder for those of you who might have recently joined us, if you have any questions for Zoe, make sure to utilize the question and answer tab below your screen, or you can place your questions in the chat. Our next speaker will be the wonderful Aisha.
Kamjambo, everyone. Kamjambo to everyone who's tuned in. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement, of course, to the organizers of this. It's very important to have platforms like these where we could come together and really try to tackle in the best way we can a lot of these issues. Because a lot of the change that we need to see in this world and a lot of the change we need to see in our communities stems from us deciding to make a change, and to make that change in any form. You know, everyone has their purpose, everyone has their role. You know, you have your protesters, you have your activists, you have your lobbyists, you have your lawyers, you have just your community, you know, how you interact with people in your space, your families, how do you really target and really address issues like anti-Blackness. What I'm going to do, a lot of what I want to say was mentioned funny enough, by two of my previous speakers. Ms. Sampson started it off in just giving a general overview and targeting the key thing that I really want to tackle, and that was the whole system. Zoe then brought in my second area of where I want to tie in this overall arching theme when she talked about the institutionalization aspect of this situation which we're in right now. I wanted to therefore marry these because they're all connected. My viewpoint on this is definitely based on the fact that there's no difference. You know, we speak of anti-Blackness and it's something that it's a very, very heavy topic. You know, let's be real. It's a very heavy topic. It's very taxing for every single person. No matter who you are, once you are a human being and you are witnessing, you know, someone being murdered, literally murdered in front of you, and there's nothing, some people felt absolutely hopeless, you know? These topics are so heavy. You know, I could kind of relate this to like concepts like being like an onion, you know? There's so many layers, you know, and the more you peel away these layers, the harder it becomes to bear. But bear it we must. Topics like these tend to conjure up deep-seated emotions. Many choose avoidance. You know, many of our people, when, you know, people, oh, I ain't able to and Black people thing, and y'all always do this thing, slavery happened a long time ago, and y'all bringing up these things, because in a way that's their coping mechanism, you know? We tend to not talk about the avoidance, but it makes people feel very uncomfortable when you talk about these types of issues. And not just other people, all people, you know, even when you're talking to people that look exactly like you, you know, they feel so uncomfortable. You could actually see some of them when you bring up things like, you know, social economic injustice, you actually see them saying, oh man, you know, let's not go there, you know, you get a little deep, man. So, you know, these things make people get very uncomfortable, and, you know, we need to get uncomfortable. You know, if we are serious about our children, if we are serious about our future generations, our ancestors were not comfortable, okay? Neither did they have a choice to choose when to engage or not to engage. It was a matter of survival, you know? And incidents such as racial profiling, you know, economic disparity, police brutality, there's lynchings. People say these things happened a long time ago. They've had like, what, 3 lynchings from the beginning of this year? So all around race wars, we are being murdered. And this is an ongoing genocide. So it forces us to deal with it. And I'm assuming this is why we are even having this discussion tonight, because there's no hiding place, there's no safe place, you know? And Zoe brought up a lot of incidences of women, Black women, you know, who die sooner in hospitals, this whole COVID situation. Even the animals outside are feeling my pain right now. But, you know, essentially, as a Black woman, like there are cases where women were killed inside their own home, you know, and taken for mistaken identity. Imagine you're sitting there having your tea, watching maybe your favorite show, who knows, right? And then all of a sudden, some guys bust through, police, bam, bam, bam. They didn't even ask, well, you're in my house. So I believe anti-Blackness, however, I want to target it from a different perspective. Many of us are aware of the day-to-day injustices. You know, we talked about, you saw the video of women discussing things about, you know, people targeting about their hair not being professional, people targeting, not thinking that they're smart or educated enough because of the way they look. But I actually want to tackle or take this from the perspective of the largest institutionalization of slavery. You know, Ms. Sampson started with the overall arching, you know, how we were kind of here in the first place. When the question was raised, the origins of anti-Blackness, what are the origins of this thing? And right away, I'm taken back to to slavery. Why slavery? Because the enslavement of African people was something that was undeniably the greatest atrocity that has happened in world history. And we're still seeing and living the devastating effects of that to this day. Because everyone has been and continues to be brainwashed. Every single person that is a part of this current system in which we're living in, there are no exceptions, not even me and you, because we are Black. We've all been brainwashed by the same system. And now people say, why do I say this? Why do I say this? Once you study history, you know, you begin to wonder and ask yourself, where does this deep-seated hate come from? You know, what could have happened? What could we have done to have people want to treat another human being like that, you know? Then you look at history as you try to dissect in order to comprehend, you know, and then you take it back to where we all were taught, no matter what school, what country you're in, we all have the same classes, same education, you know? All of us have heard about Columbus, you know? Discovering the new world. And this is not by accident, you know? These are not things that happen by accident. And then you start to realize the commonalities and the trends, you know, and then you take it back to what really was. What was this? Why? And then it always comes back to what? Economics, right? Economics. If you review history, you would see that prior to our enslavement, the start of the transatlantic slave trade, before there was the official institutionalization of slavery, there was slavery in this world. Slavery has been in this world for millennia, you know? People of all backgrounds, all colors, all creeds, all across this world have been enslaved or forced to serve or work for some elite group, you know? Everywhere in this world, you know? It wasn't just people like us with our skin color. The Irish were brought here in many of the Caribbean to work on plantations. It wasn't just us. You know, you had Irish taken around the world, you had Portuguese enslaved. You go to homogenous societies like Korea, and you hear stories about the Nobi being enslaved to serve the Yanbins. You go all across the world and you hear these stories. So many of us have believed that because we were different, or because we're Black, or because Black people's attributes or cultures or belief systems are the reasons why they hate us. I don't think that's any of the above. That's what stemmed after. That's what stemmed after. Because I believe that those things were created, the system therefore created certain narratives to justify the complete exploitation of others, taking another human being and putting them through such torture. You know, how do you explain this to yourself, your families, and society? You know, you create a narrative, but that your people could advocate for, they could enforce and defend. You know, you brainwash not only the people you're enslaving, but the whole world. You know, to believe that Black is bad, you know, those people are not really humans. You know, they're devil worshipers, or they're savages, or they're all these things that up to this day, Black people are so uncomfortable associating themselves with the term Africa because of these terms. So essentially they've created, right, this narrative at Black is bad, and then they're not human, to justify your actions and your treatments. So it may have started initially, right, you know, as a source to justify why you're exploiting people and to make it sit easier with themselves. But then that wasn't a couple of years, that became centuries. So what eventually ends up happening is those lies eventually become facts, and then those so-called things created then become people's realities. And then before you know it, everything is surrounded and based off of these notions. Why I say this, anti-Blackness is sparred throughout the entire world. The bleaching in Asia, you know, the preference for fairer among Arab women, among Indian women, among Chinese women. So what you found is that this narrative is not just specific to us as a people. It has permeated the world. And in that permeation, we in ourselves start to believe these narratives. When we, amongst our own selves, talking to our own people, we say things like, I know I'm standing in the sun. You know how much people have come to me and said, you get out the sun, you get too Black. We there in the sun without umbrella, girl. You can get too Black. And I'm thinking to myself, well, is that, okay, so I'm assuming that's a bad thing because she's yelling at me, okay? She's yelling at me not to get my vitamin D. So essentially, you have this. And then the young woman said, oh, my hair was an issue, or, you know, the concepts which you heard in the video, oh, she's pretty for a dark-skinned girl. We hear this stuff all the time. We say it, and it goes from the overt, you Black evil person, and it goes to the subtle little comments that we do amongst ourselves. You know what I mean? So this whole concept of Blackness has to be targeted on so many levels. You know, we are angry. We're upset, we're sad, we're emotionally devastated when we see that these people are acting these way towards us. But then saying that, hey, we are different, it's ingrained. A lot of what we experience are in our subconscious. Many people are not even aware, right? A lot of things either stimulate certain reactions, but these are things that have been embedded for generations. And it's going to take a lot of work. And we have to start and look at things such as the narratives which we create. Our media constantly keeps on perpetuating these same stereotypes. I watch shows with my niece, and she's has jokes in the little cartoons talking about, oh, the black dark place or the witch or black magic. And these things are constantly being used. You look at magazines, you look at commercials right here, you know, in a country that, to be honest with you, our Caucasian population, and all the ads, the women are, you go through some of our magazines, a bunch of white people from America or Europe, not even from Guyana. Even the stock photos you choose don't look like any of us, you know? And I'm there wondering, what is wrong with us? You know, and some of us don't even realize it. Our preference in our magazines, our commercials, who we think is pretty, who you would push forward for a pageant, the girls who are preferred in high school, that's ingrained and embedded. And it's so deep that we really have to be targeting our educational system that starts this whole process. We are all here, most of us, if not all of us, have all been educated. In, let's say, basic level. And then when you hit up science and university, you get hit with that. We, as a scientist, we're still learning about Darwinism. Darwin's classification of species, okay? That is from the same school of thought, from scientists who thought the world was square. You know what I mean? And we are still holding these so-called scholars and then re-indoctrinating so-called young minds continuously over things that are not real. We're able to update the world is not square, it's now round, but we haven't updated all those anthropologists that did studies about those savage cultures. You know what I mean? And so all of that in the dialogue has to be addressed. And when we talk about anti-Blackness, I want to expand it. It's not only between our community. No, we have to work within our community because that's who we impact. But it's the entire world, you know? And you have to take it away because many of us think it's because we are certain Black features. It's not only your Black features. Now it may be because people have forgotten why they started in the first place. It was economics, you know? So on that note, I don't know if you're waving as in my time. Am I? Kayshell? Yeah? Okay, so with that being said, there's so much to talk about this topic, as I said. I barely scratched the surface on it. Many of us would not scratch the surface of it in this conversation, but I will hand it over, of course, to our moderators, because we still have one beautiful panelist, at least to share her piece. And I'm sure many of you are looking forward to hear what she has to say. We admire her very well, and I don't want to take up all her time either. So back to the moderators, and then we could continue.
Thank you so much, Ms. Haynes. I must say, wow, you've drawn my colleagues and I so much into your delivery, and we love your passion. So thank you so much for that delivery. Now we'll have Mistress Henry-Fraser, and she'll be giving us her passionate piece.
I was actually also going to comment on the energy and passion of Aisha and Zoe's presentations before mine. I was completely drawn in, and I'm just so proud of the women that you are. I am proud of the women that also organized this activity, and I'm so humbled to be a part of it. So thank you all once again for having me here. I will try my best to keep it within the particular time that was set. But you know, when I was asked to speak on this topic, I felt overjoyed, and I also felt a sadness because of the fact that there is a topic like this that we have to speak on anti-Blackness, anti-who I am, anti-who you are. And I felt I shouldn't be put in a position where I have to defend myself, where I have to convince the world to see my value and to see the value of my brothers and sisters. But that is the reality that we live in. That's the reality that we face. And that is a necessary fight, a necessary evil, I guess. So pros and cons. And just like Zoe as well, I also did some research on the term anti-Blackism quite a bit. When I read anti-Blackness, it felt so direct, it felt so strong, it felt so pointed. And I thought that it was something I should look more into because, again, it's not very common. And so when I did, one of the words that stuck out to me, like in Zoe's presentation, is the word antagonist. And really what that word antagonist means, to be anti-Black, it means to be an antagonist to Black and to Black people, to Black people's values and to our objectives, to our goals and the things we want to achieve. And an antagonist is something that you actively do. It's not a passive process and that you just do it by the way, but you go out of your way to make it difficult for Black people to thrive and for Black people to be successful. And not just that, for Black people to simply survive and be equal. Because one of the things you notice with all of the different protests and the different movements that are happening, we're not asking for anything extra. You know, we're asking for basic human rights just to be able to exist in the space in which we're in. And I thought it was interesting that we are the ones that are on the defending end of an antagonist, whoever that antagonist might be. And it also made me think about whether or not it was anti-Blackness or anti-Black people. And what I mean by that is that there are certain aspects of Blackness, certain Black features, certain Black values, certain Black culture that the world likes to consume and they like to embrace. But they don't like to embrace the people, the human beings that are behind those things. We all see it in music, we all see it in our celebrities, and I'll comment more so on the media side as well as the women in tech side, because that's my personal experience. But you see that they love Blackness, they just don't love Black people. And I thought that was interesting, and it made me wonder also, why is there a force against Black people? Similarly to what Aisha said, we need to get back to the root causes of it. And in my research, it became very clear that it's not that Black people are lesser human beings, even though science, in fact, did try to make us seem like we were less human beings because of the shape of our skulls and the color of our skin. But it is because Black people they're threatening. You know, we have, if you look at it as a basic workforce, we tend to be stronger when we work. And obviously I'm making generalizations, but I'm just talking about the general perception and also what experience has shown with certain different ethnicities, that they tend to be stronger. So they present a physical danger. To them, we seem to have a sexual danger. We love harder, we have more passion, and all these different things that are typically supposed to be good things. But when it comes to Black people, it is seen as negative things. And I think that's really where that anti-Blackness comes from. It comes from a place of fear, not understanding us, and also being threatened by us. And if you don't understand something, and if you can't control something, the very next thing you need to do is to destroy it. And that's where you start to minimize Black people. And that's where you start to make us feel terrible about ourselves, and to look at the good things about us. Our passion, you now call it attitude. And our strength, you now call it propensity for violence, when really those things were meant to be good features. And so I think that's really what anti-Blackness is for me. Particularly as a Black woman, one of the most interesting things I think that Black women face is that we carry an entire race on our back. When you are in school, when you are in the workplace, you're not just Tamika Henry the individual. You're Tamika Henry, the Black girl who represents every other Black girl. Because they judge you and whatever you do, you then represent your entire race. And I think that applies to many other minority groups, but certainly not the majority. That is why when a Black person commits a crime, allegedly, or that person does something that is not appropriate, they describe it as the Black people did this, the Black nation did this, as opposed to that individual. Whereas if a white person does it, or somebody who is Eurocentric does it, they tend to focus on the individual and not expand to the entire race. So from the moment that you were born as a Black woman, you have that pressure on you to carry and to represent your entire race. And that gives you a more difficult time in navigating the world and navigating what's most important to you and determining who you are, because you're not just yourself. The other thing too is that I believe that Black people and Black women in particular have to work harder. As it relates to the work environment, we're not just judged on the quality of our work. We're not just judged on, how we do a presentation. We are judged on how we look, on how we say certain words, on our neck movements. And these things might sound very basic and very simple, but I think, they have a lasting impact when you walk into a room to do a presentation and you have to consider so many other different things that your workmates don't have to consider. You now have to think about all of these different factors that will impact your performance, simply because you are, in most cases, addressing a room that does not have equal representation. If you're lucky, you have one Black person on the panel or one Black person in leadership positions, but in most cases, there's not an equal representation there. And worse yet, there's not usually an equal gender representation in the workforce, particularly in leadership positions. That is not to say that they're not Black people who are excellent leaders and women who are leaders. My point is there is still a bit of a disproportion in the workforce. And so when you are trying to infiltrate those spaces, it feels as if you were doing it on your own. And as a result of that, you are judged under a different lens. And I found that that really affects your performance in the job. For me specifically, I'm both involved in tech, in science, as well as in law enforcement. And in both those fields, it is male dominated. And so I also have to deal with the gender biases of, you know, asserting myself as a leader and being seen as strong, as decisive, as passionate, as opposed to being, having an attitude problem or nagging or all the different negative words that are used to describe women, and particularly Black women that are passionate, whereas those words are not used to describe women of other races. So it tends to affect, again, your job performance, at least in my particular instance. And then apart from that, the very obvious elephant in the room, being a woman in those kinds of careers, you now have to police the way you dress even more than the average person, because our features tend to stand out more. And because of that, we have to over-consider how we then dress ourselves. We now have to cover up our features. We have to make everyone around us feel comfortable. So if I walk into work on Monday, I have to think about how I speak to you, how I walk, how I dress, and how my attributes are looking before I even get to focus on my work. And that is why in the workforce, women have to work even harder than men, and Black women have to work even harder than women of any other ethnicity. The other thing too that I found from my personal experience is Black education, or rather, again, being Black in the classroom, as was also mentioned by Zoe, as opposed to being any other race in the classroom. I was reading a blog, and somebody said something very interesting to me, which was that if you're in a classroom and you're trying to explain yourself and you want to go ahead and give an analogy, because of your experiences, you're going to have different examples in your life that you can draw from, different analogies that you can actually make to demonstrate your point in a classroom. And many times, your experiences will be the minority experience. And so you have to work harder to get persons to understand your points and to relate to your experiences. And you can also see that in the educational system, because many of the stories don't necessarily cater to our stories and our experiences. Think about when you were in school, and I guess in Ghana it might be a little bit different because we do have a lot of local textbooks or texts with local stories, but think about what you studied in literature and how many Black characters were in those books and how many heroic Black characters were in those books. And as a child, not seeing that representation and not knowing that you can be more than the farmhand or the nanny or the chef, and not seeing those people, those characters in the stories that you were told, in the nursery rhymes as well, that you are told from when you are young. And so the Black education experience is also quite different. I've also thought about Black people and how we are treated in business. As a fresh entrepreneur, I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I think, you know, even in the time that I've been existing in the space of entrepreneurship, I've had to deal with being Black and also being a woman. One experience that I will never forget is my partner and I, Denisha, we were trying to find a venue for the first ever Curl Fed. And this was in 2016. And we had visited several different event spaces to try to figure out where we can actually have this event. And I remember I went to one very popular establishment in the heart of the city, and I pitched the idea and I explained to them what I wanted the space to do. And without skipping a beat, this person says to me, we don't want any ghetto events at our venue. Which I didn't know how to respond. Because if you know me and if you know Denisha, you would know that if we're making a presentation for our project, we will use proper English, we're going to do a PowerPoint presentation, we're going to dress the part, you know, we're going to do things in a professional manner. So it's not going to be the stereotypical what people call ghetto, which in itself is problematic, but that's a different issue. So we did the best we could in terms of presenting a viable business plan for this thing. And just because we were Black and they assumed it was a Black people party, they said they don't want a ghetto event at their venue. And that wasn't the first and last time we were met with that kind of a response. And it blew my mind that was still happening in a space and time that we were supposed to be educated and modern and all of these different things. So, you know, Black people in business, we're not really seen as capable of handling money, being responsible with our money, and doing things that are not parties or fetes or fun or whatever it is. Never mind, it's called Curl Fet. It's not really a fet. You get my point. The next thing I also talked about is that Black people are also expected to fail, and particularly Black women. Black women are disproportionately pregnant in school, and then they are also expected to drop out of school and be caregivers. And that came all the way from slavery, where Black people were expected to take care of white children and not necessarily their own children. And so that stereotype tends to carry on throughout from history up until now. And so we're also expected to fail. So we have our own hopes and dreams riding on us, and then also everyone else's expectations of us to supersede. So it becomes quite difficult to try to achieve everything that you were supposed to achieve, not for yourself, but for the entire community. And the final point that I want to touch on is the Black female experience in the media. This is something that I've also dabbled with, and really is where I initially found my voice. So my media experience started in 2010 when I did the Miss Universe pageant. And back then, we didn't have as much influence on social media. We didn't have as much representation of Black beauty, rather, in magazines or on TV stations, or, you know, social media has really changed how Black beauty is consumed, largely because we've been putting it out ourselves. That whole shift in recognizing, you know, the Black skin tone when you're making your foundation, and companies now, large companies now making products for natural hair, we did that. They didn't just wake up and decide to do that. Social media, in a way, has helped us to have our own platforms and to build our own stages to be able to do that. So before that time, that's really where my awakening of Blackness, or the lack of Blackness in beauty, really came, where the only time Black features were shown, it was to make a point of it being exotic or of it being some sort of fetish, but by no means the standard. I remember watching ads on TV, you'd predominantly see Eurocentric features. And if you did see a Black family in an ad, you know, when I was a child, 9 out of 10 times, it would be a mixed Black family. It'd be a Black and white family that had this long, gorgeous, or the blonde curls and the light skin. And, you know, the closest thing you can get to being white, but without actually being white, that's what you used to see in the ads, even when they try to be inclusive and feature Black women and Black beauty. And I think that shift is only happening in a way that is recognizable in recent years. And so being a woman and being in the media, I was subject to comments about my skin tone. Oh yeah, you're pretty for a Black girl. Oh, you have such nice skin for a Black girl. I mean, we all get that. And then the year when I cut my hair to hand over my Miss Universe crown, I did it bald. I had a big chop. I got all these comments about, I just cut off my beauty. My hair was my beauty. You know, my hair is unprofessional. My hair is dirty. Same old story as every other Black girl. But I think the thing that really shows the level of disrespect and trivialization for the Black woman is people's insistence on touching Black hair. I understand that you might be fascinated by our kinks and our curls and how different it is and how versatile it is. But I think people have convinced themselves that they have a right to access our features and to access our bodies, so much so that they can come into our space and touch our hair. Some persons actually ask, but what makes you believe that you even have the right to ask to touch me, to touch my features, especially if you're not familiar with me? And there are different ways to express your admiration for Black features and for Black beauty without necessarily invading that person's privacy and that person's space. But I think the belief that you are entitled to comment on my features and to touch my features really speaks to the fact of you believe that we are property and that we are these exotic pieces of things that you can parade around from time to time. But apart from that, you put us back in our shelves whenever you're done with us, and then that's all we have to give. Just something for you to look at and for you to enjoy in that moment. And I want to argue that Black people, Black women, are much more than that. And I think it starts from, as a people, us believing in ourselves and us recognizing that value in ourselves and making ourselves so proud of ourselves that there really is no room for any other negativity to get in there. The negativity is out in the world, and we do need to address that in the way that we are addressing it. But I also believe that we need to address that self-love and that negativity within ourselves too, before we, not before, but in tandem with what we are doing with the rest of the world. So that's more or less my takeaway on what it's been like to be a Black woman trying to navigate the world of business, media as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, a lot of things that you said really resonated with me. And I feel like I really like the feminine energy that we have here. So next week, we have another series confronting the anti-Blackness in 2020, the African male experience. And trust me, they have a high bar to jump because the female experience and the female energy here, it's really awesome. And I'd like to thank our listeners for being so keen and attentive. And we have our first question here from Miss Watson. Miss Watson, this question is directed towards Zoe. Miss Watson said she's of the opinion that Black women are only praised, especially dark-skinned women, by Black men and the wider society when we are on the front lines and being strong warrior queens. There are little to no reciprocations where we're concerned. The strong Black women narrative is directly to blame. So do you agree that we are overly exposed and protected by even the men in our community? Of course, we know not all Black men, but I'm referring to the general populace of Black men who themselves harm us and encourage harm, disrespect from other groups. This question is directed towards Ms. Zoe.
Wow. That's a deep question. That is a deep question. And I love it. I love it. I love it because coincidentally, the network that I am a part of, that is the question that we are having at this very moment. A friend of mine posted, a Black man, right, posted that question, asking the Black women whether they feel protected by Black men. Now I'll respond to the first part about feeling being warriors and feeling that we have to be on the forefront. I wouldn't say that the Black men are putting us in those positions. I feel that because of the way society is set up, we're forced to take those positions, that we're forced to stand up and stand out, to speak for our community and speak out against the oppression and the atrocities that are being meted out by our community. And I'm going to speak in the content specifically within the United States. Because the violence that we see, the visible violence that we see are for the most part unleashed on Black men. A mother explained this to a reporter one day. A group of armed white men showed up at their house. They were looking for a young girl who they thought her son had captured and taken away. And so they showed up at the house with guns, weapons, looking for this person. They see her son in the room and was ready to take him away. This happened a few weeks ago, I would say last month. And the mother was standing in the doorway between her son and this mob, I'm gonna call them, and he is in the background saying, "Mom, like, I move away from the door," trying to get to the door. As a man, though he's in his 20s, as a man, he wanted to get to that door and protect his mother, right, from this armed mob. However, his mother knows that if he only went to the door, what would happen to him as a Black man, right? We know what happens to Black men. So she had to then take that position as a mother, right? And tell him as the male of the home that he needed to step back because she did not want to risk him going to the door. And so the son explained how dehumanizing and belittling it was as a man that he had to stand back and allow his mother to be the one to protect him. So it is because of institutional racism, right? It is because of blatant racism that we as women have to, and we are forced to stand up and stand out to protect our family, protect the men in our lives, and speak out against, what is happening in our communities. And and in a way, it makes us, be forced to be those strong women, right? It forces us to take on that role and that responsibility, and then it affects our relationships with the men in our lives, right? It has some kind of an impact in our interactions and the relationship that we have with the women, with the men in our lives. And I think I'm missing another part of the question. What was the latter part of the question? My apologies.
That's okay. The latter part was if the Black men in our community are big enough to protect us.
And when women are asked that question, the answer to that is a resounding no. Black women do not feel as though Black men take on that protective role that is expected of them. Now, the question is why that is the case, but there is a feeling by Black women that they are not being protected, right? So it can be a chicken and egg situation, right? You're in a society where women are forced to be in that dominant position, and men are forced to have to not be empowered in that physical space, public space, for obvious reasons, right? To be in a society where systematically the system is put in a place where the Black man is dehumanized and belittled, instinctively then his role within the community then is removed. And so do Black women feel protected? No. It also goes back to the stereotype of Black women, right? I think it also goes back to how does society view women and place women, particularly Black women, in a way in which we have to love ourselves, right? Tamika mentioned the fact that, the visibility of the dark-skinned women, right? The appreciation and love for embracing ourselves naturally, our natural beauty, our natural hair came from us, because we do not live in a society that perpetuates Black beauty and put us on that pedestal. And so how does that impact the Black man? How does it impact and affect how the Black man sees the Black women? And so I think it's all tied into whether we're protected, whether we're valued, whether we're appreciated and loved in a more public space. And that my answer to that would be no.
Thank you very much, Zoe. Thank you very much. So our next question will be from the audience, Renata. And this question will be directed to all the panelists. So we'd like to hear your views on this. The question reads, why are Black women tasked with teaching the Black man how to protect and defend them? And even when we try, are seen as angry and using a harsh tone, almost as though we have to cradle the Black man. So is there a conversation to be had? So any one of the panelists, you could take this question. I think since Zoe went, we can probably hear from Aisha.
Well, that question, I found that very troubling because I don't believe that. Based on my personal experience, I do not feel that, I don't feel abandoned by my Black man. Neither do I feel that I have been tasked. In a way, it's a challenging question. Some people might say that we may be, but essentially in a way we are, because we are the mothers. We have sons, so we have sons. We have younger brothers. We have that role where we are raising young Black men. So in that context, yes, we have tasked with teaching our young men, their roles. And also, but you see, that's also the problem. Because how a mother raises a son is very different to how a father raises a son. And many times we're forced based on what Zoe mentioned, the socioeconomic situation, the higher representation in prison systems. Many times we're forced to take on certain roles because even stemming all the way back into our slavery, you were stripped, you weren't the family unit wasn't something that was promoted. And even now our family unit isn't promoted in media. You know, many times I hear a lot of fellow women talk about how, oh, the Black men are not there. We don't see a lot of representation of Black couples. And the truth of the matter is there are a lot of Black couples because there's still a lot of Black babies. So clearly there is a connection and a unity. And a lot of Black women have said that they feel sometimes it's easier for them to express certain emotions and understandings to their fellow Black male. But in relation to that specific question, I think it's a very troubling question. And I think it's a very problematic question in the sense for our community, because it keeps on pushing those stereotypes, and it's actually more damaging than it is helpful. Because and all the thing you have to look at is the different in our societies in terms of matriarchy and patriarchy. Because we have this concept that the system which we live in is highly patriarchal. And we have to understand within our cultures that many of our cultures were matriarchal. So we had a responsibility, you know, many of us were leaders within our communities. So in a way, as a Black woman, that question coming from another Black woman kind of makes me feel like I'm put into a position where I'm supposed to be docile and you are supposed to stand down. Whereas we believe more in terms of a partnership, in terms of two energies, male and female energies, balancing themselves and working together to deal and address with different issues in society. So I don't think it's a matter of one going forward over the other, because as being said, Zoe did mention, you know, based on the system and many things within has caused us to take those roles. But essentially, you know, it's very important that we don't get caught into that discourse in terms of the divisive way in which we tackle our issues, because I've seen many Black men have been on the front lines as well. I've seen many Black men supporting women in the struggle as well. Many Black men have jumped to the front of police when they see them about to hit their women. They may be at the back and then out of nowhere, you know, they appear, you know. So if I feel isolated as a Black, I could say this because I have been in activism. You know, I have been, and I've seen brothers equally passionate, and they may approach things differently. You know, we might be more to the front and more vocal, and just because our brothers are not vocal doesn't mean they're not present, and it doesn't mean that they're not supportive, and doesn't mean that they're not there. And I think we have to be very careful with the use of the language like cradling and why do we feel it's our duty. We're mothers. We have to teach our sons. We have to. And if you're in a relationship where you're a partner and your partner may not be as aware as you, I expect the more aware person to share that knowledge with their partner and vice versa. You know, so I think we have to be very careful when we use certain terms and we understand this. As I said, the system is very important to understanding. Many societies are not only patriarchal. We had a lot of matriarchal societies as well, where there were queen mothers and women queens who were forced to make certain decisions. So we have to understand that narrative as well and be very careful we don't fall into the patriarchal discussion and what is the definition of womanhood. Because especially in the Caribbean, we do have the concept of what are women roles and man roles, and then it gets very complicated. And I think we have to be careful with that narrative and not distract ourselves from the real issue of anti-Blackness, and also working together as a team to really address these things that affect us all as a family and as a community.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Aisha. Is there anyone else on the panel would like to add on what Aisha just said relating to this question?
Yeah, I just want to say that I agree wholeheartedly with what Aisha said, that it's important that we don't establish a competition between the Black man and the Black woman. I think it's important that we keep that as a unit. We've already been stripped of that unit, or they've tried to strip us of that unit before, and I think it's important that we keep that together. But I rather suspect that the question was coming from a place of violence against women in terms of, I want to be clear in saying that is not a Black issue. It's not a case where Black men are killing more Black women than any other race or any other group. It may seem as if you're seeing more of that in the media because of the makeup of our community. Is also an issue of reporting. And, you know, I think in many cases, Black communities and Black families may actually be more vocal about these acts of violence, and that's why you're seeing them more. But it's not necessarily that there's a disproportionate amount of Black domestic violence versus any other race of domestic violence. And I suspect that's where the question was coming from. So just in case that was it, again, it's in my experience and in my research, that's really not the case. And I don't think that we should necessarily shift focus on that at this point in time. To me, it's very similar to that argument where it says, oh, but you know, Blacks kill Blacks more than any other race, so why are we fighting about white police killing Black men? To me, those kinds of discussions really distract from the main issue. Not that those aren't real issues, they are, but I think that we need to keep a focus on what we desperately need to focus on. That is the fact that we are losing our lives and we are being denied opportunities at an equal rate.
Thank you so much, Tamika. I hope this question was answered, and I hope they answered it well. This question is directed towards Aisha, and the question reads, in the context of Guyana, do you believe we're generally in a place to start having these conversations on a wider scale? Most of us are of the opinion that serious racial issues are only existent in the US, and a lot of us still believe that features of the Black phenotype, like dark skin, is something bad. We still see microaggressions as jokes and assist in the perpetuation of negative stereotypes and against us by Indo-Guyanese. Ms. Aisha?
Well, the question originally started with if we felt that it was necessary to discuss or have these conversations in the context of Guyana. But then in the same question, it kind of answered that, you know, the microaggressions, the how within this diverse society in which we live in, we get those same kind of aggressions, maybe not from white, but of course from, in Toronto terms, we will call the brown brothers or our Indo-Guyanese. So essentially the question, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the question, because essentially you're asking if it's things that we need to address, while at the same time, you've kind of highlighted the reason why we need to address this in Guyana. And I think that a part of this is that I think the knowledge of each other, you know, we all know the saying, ignorance is bliss. And the more we learn, and in Guyana itself, there's a lot of knowledge lacking within our own communities, as well as the Indo-Guyanese community about Afro-Guyanese. And they too are bombarded by this. I said, all of us, no whether you're white, whether you're of African descent, Caucasian, you're Indo, you're Chinese, the anti-Blackness, as I said, is the system. It affects all of us. Many in the Indo-Guyanese community are very ignorant about a lot of things that relate to African culture. You still have people saying, oh, Black man gonna rape the women, and all these very negative connotations, and even amongst themselves, the differentiation between dark versus light Indians. So the concept of anti-Blackness stems very heavily in the Indo-Guyanese community. If we're bringing it specifically to the race between Indo and Afro-Guyanese, it's very important that we continue learning and spreading the knowledge of each other, because it's very essential for us. Because what I found over the time, you know, essentially I'm in African organizations in Guyana. Many people feel uncomfortable with it. And some people wonder, like, when you interact with others, like, how do they approach you? And I could say this, the more people knowing, when I identify with who I am, I find Indo-Guyanese, once you clearly speak your points, when they say certain things that are coming from a place of lack of knowledge or just ignorance about, and you correct them or bring it to their attention, you find that their reactions are different. The more and more they become exposed to facts, and the more and more these things are not constantly being reiterated within their communities, you'll find that the more understanding and the less you'd see it. But then I can't really say that, because we just had an election and many of us were dumbfounded by what took place, which means that those same dialogues, those same things are just constantly being perpetuated over and over and over and over. That's what makes it very important for us to really address and talk about the overarching effect of anti-Blackness and how this is something that affects each and every one of us. And another thing that came out of, let's use this current situation, out of elections, let's say, right? There was a comment that came out that Indo-Guyanese were gonna poison all the food pots. And then eventually a lot of Afro-Guyanese stopped buying from Indian farmers, right? And they started supporting more their own gardens or supporting Afro-Guyanese agriculturalists. However, as that time went on, there was a shift. A lot of Indo-Guyanese started saying that Afro-Guyanese were racist for supporting Afro-Guyanese agriculturists versus them. And then that just purely highlighted the codependence of each other in this society. You know, if you were to remove all of one race out of Guyana, the other cannot survive. Guyana is very highly codependent. The races in Guyana, whether they want to admit it or not, are highly dependent on each other. There's a codependence there, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And I think bringing more awareness to those and also clearly speaking out against instances or calling people out on it is something that we need to continue doing, because the whole concept of multiculturalism and multi-diverse societies are all works in progress. You know, they're not things that are come overnight. And as I said, it's very important we address and discuss facts and not get pulled into a lot of the narratives that are not based in reality, and essentially highlighting those and keep on pushing, representing, you know, as we stand and as we represent, and as we do and we build, a lot of those narratives would change. So I'm not sure if I did that question justice. I tried to, but I tried to. Because it's a very complex question with a lot of layers I talked about with the onion. And, you know, I don't want to be misconstrued, but I hope I did some kind of justice. I know I didn't really
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you so much. And I trust that the response was favorable to the person who asked it. And now we'll have a question for Zoe. And that question is about your brand, you know, Sarabo. What propelled you to create the brand, and what has your experience with the wider African community been like because of it? So we want to hear about your brand. Yes.
Oh, what propelled me? So it was all an act of, I think, faith in the universe. So I, having majored in African and African American studies, I joined an African sorority, right? So I was very much ingrained with the African community, had a lot of friends during college. And as I graduated, I started, you know, becoming more interested in African wear, clothing, the fashion. It was not very much prevalent in Arizona at the time. It wasn't common to see people wear African clothing that were not Africans. But I started wearing the maxi dresses and, you know, becoming more aware of what the fashion was all about. And then coincidentally, I met someone who, you know, convinced me to do a fashion show, which was the first fashion show in Arizona of that type, and it was successful. And I decided, you know what, this clearly is a need. It was a need because in my interactions with my African friends, particularly those who were refugees, I would, in conversations with their families, would learn that they were getting clothing directly from Africa when there's a new refugee family flying into Arizona. And I thought that was remarkable, because, you know, they would have to make a phone call to somebody, say, hey, when are you flying in? Okay, can you buy me this and this and this? Send them money so they can, you know, get some more clothing, because they couldn't have access to that in Arizona. Along with that, in working with the refugee community, beautiful young Africans going to school here in Arizona started to lose a sense of self and identity, right? They're noticeably Black African, right? But they did not want to be African because they were teased about their culture and their sense of self. And so there I am their way of becoming Americanized was by looking at, television, the music videos, and identifying with the rappers that they saw on television, because that's what their concept and idea of what Blackness means for them. And so it broke my heart to see that they were losing themselves and the richness of who they are, because they were so desperately needing to feel belonged within this society, but not in a very fulfilling way. And so with a combination of all these things happening, I decided that I needed to do something. And so I decided to start my brand. I started creating pieces that I knew was needed, that I couldn't see that was a combination of African pattern and fabric, but more with a Western flair, so that young Black boys, young Black girls can know that it's okay, to embrace themselves, love themselves, and appreciate them for who they are. And have pride in that. And so I am shaping my brand to be that example of Blackness, not anti-Blackness, but of Blackness and pride, that they can see that it's okay for them to wear the clothing and represent themselves. So I have to go, so I am going to excuse myself. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and it was truly an honor to be a part of this panel.
Thank you so much. And you look gorgeous, by the way, and I'm sure you're going to let us know how we can get a few of those pieces if it's possible.
Okay, I will.
Zoe, up to you.
Thank you so much, Kayshell. It was so nice to have Ms. Zoe here with us. So we have a question for Tamika. What is your advice to young African women who, like you, wish to pursue diverse fields, but do not know how to maneuver systems that have been systematically and strategically built to oppress them? So I'll repeat that. What is your advice to young African women who, like you, wish to pursue diverse fields, but do not know how to maneuver systems that have been systematically and strategically built to oppress them? Ms.Tamika.
All right, so I think before you embark on any new venture and any feature, research and education are going to be your friends. And I don't necessarily mean academics or being in a classroom or learning how to do business in the formal setting. While that's important, I do believe that you need to have some amount of stories. Reach out to other persons who may have done something similar, or even if it's not similar, persons who you can look at in terms of mentor. I think it's important to have, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I know that many other members of the Black community are passionate about. It's important to have information before you get into any venture. And it might not necessarily be information on how to do it. It can also be what not to do, and what mistakes and with what pitfalls to avoid. And I thought that was very important to me in my journey in figuring out how to navigate my different areas of interest. I also believe that you have to be prepared for a significant amount of pushback. And that's not to sound cliche, but if you're going to do something new, something for the first time, something unusual, especially if it's not usual in your community or in your family or even in your country, then there's going to be a lot of negativity surrounding that. So you have to be able to fight for what it is that you want to achieve. Understand what your vision is and be willing to fight for it, because oftentimes you're going to be doing it by yourself and you're not going to get the support that you think you're supposed to get. So you have to be able to understand that. Independence, I think, is also very important. Independence of thought and independence of action. You have to work. Unfortunately for us, when you look like many of us and when you come from the kinds of families that we come from, you don't necessarily get things handed to you on a silver platter. Because of how the system is, we are starting at a disadvantage, and for that reason, we are expected to work. But each time one of us, each time a Black woman, a woman, a Guyanese, each time anyone from a marginalized community of any sort, they achieve some each of the completely, and so you kind of almost owe it to them to be able to achieve something. And it's not because I felt that. I knew, because I was afraid to ask questions until I started this mantra where it was like, the worst that could happen is that they wouldn't answer. And then you will know. You have to find some other source of the answer. So it's important to ask questions, out those answers. I'm involved in science, in media, in business, in proofreading, and a whole bunch of different activities. And those it's not a random collection of activities. Usually before I decide what I'm going to do, what's important to me, it has to be something, and I always say this, it has to be something that pisses me off. If it pisses me off enough, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to work hard to fix it. And that's usually how I choose my venture. So whatever you choose, it shouldn't just be about the money. Of course, the money has to be a part of it, because if you're going to be realistic and you want to get into business, you do have to consider your income. After all, I think that Black people in general need to get more comfortable with embracing the idea of earning money and accumulating wealth and not feeling bad about that. There's also a bit of a negative thing in terms of, Black people don't like money, and there's so many different stereotypes around Black people, and it's a whole different story. The point is, even though it's important, it also needs to be an issue that you are passionate about fixing, something that keeps you up at night and that it means enough to you to have to work, because it's not going to be a smooth path. So you have to have something keeping you there besides the income aspect of it. So these are things that I wish I knew when I was starting, and things that I'm still learning as I go along the way. And if anybody else has any questions about any aspect of what I do, or just in general, I'm always easily accessible as well. So I'm volunteering to be one of the mentors that can help you out in that process.
Thank you so much, Tamika, for this. And so she's being very honest, guys. If you have any more questions.
Sorry, I cannot hear.
Oh, you can hear? You can reach out to her for more information. And she's a very dynamic Black woman, and to be in all those fields is truly
my audio
incredible.
Is gone.
So, Aisha, do you have anything you want to add to the questions that have been asked earlier?
Add to the questions. I think most of us did a really good job in, we made a really good attempt on trying to tackle such a serious topic. However, one thing that we touched on, Tamika mentioned as well, the economics. Some of the questions you sent to us and some of the questions which were sent kind of discuss, Black women. And one of the major things that we do that are faced, my work in the community, is essentially economics. It's definitely a challenge that's affecting our families. It's having a very negative impact on terms of this very structure of our family, because many of our women are forced to have to find work, and a lot of work, which forces them to abandon, to have to leave their children unattended for long periods of time. And I think the topics that we discussed talked about identity, understanding value, and understanding many of Black women feel that their identity, who they are as themselves, is really an obstacle to opportunity. And I wanted to use this platform to say that who you are is not an obstacle to your to opportunities. Essentially, I want to say, based on this actress, funny enough, America Ferrera, that said, essentially, who you are is essentially your superpower. And highlighting on the panelists today, all of us, are very active in our community. We're very diverse, but all of us are entrepreneurs. We all have essentially, when the system or the path wasn't working, we created our own path. And for the young woman who asked the question about, advice, and Tamika offering that advice, I would further like to say that's also something that I do. We mentor, through the organization. We've run many entrepreneurship programs. We're very, very serious about the development of Black business and business opportunities, and just essentially supporting each other's community. So on that note, anyone who is a bit confused or needs guidance, some people it's very overwhelming. Being an entrepreneur is not glamorous, so let's not even pretend like it is. It's not glamorous. It has very challenges. It's very challenging, and some may feel that because of who they are, there are more challenges. Yes, we are faced with some additional obstacles, but once you are creating, we are forced to create our own path and to pretty much explore other opportunities. And for new people coming into the industry, my advice, or into the firm of entrepreneurship, whatever business it may be, I would like to encourage you to first research what's already out there. You know, many times I'm very annoyed when you see, let's say someone came with an idea and then 2 weeks later, a lady parks her stand right next door. You see, that causes a problem because neither of you would be able to make enough to cover your costs if you're essentially created a competition in a very narrow market. I'd like to encourage you to reach out to those who may have already been in the business and see, look at how you can either add some kind of value or partner together on certain initiatives. If you don't want to intertwine your businesses, you could do partnerships. And I really, really wanted to, commend everyone again who's been tuned in. We actually tackled a very wide range of topics.
Indeed.
Yeah, and as much as it may have surfaced, a lot of very deep. And the one that was core, the connection between it all was essentially your identity, who you are, how you represent yourself, and understanding your value. And I want to also harp back on that. Your identity can be your superpower. It's not your obstacle, and understanding that value. So it doesn't matter. People will treat you how you project yourself sometimes, and you have to correct that. If they are disrespecting you, do not sit there and allow that to happen, but find ways in which you can create your own voice. Many of us are afraid, and you have to understand that indeed, some people are afraid, you lose your opportunity, you lose access to income. But I want to encourage those that to try, you have to continually keep on looking at ways and tapping into and doing research. You have to do research in terms of what's available and what you think you can, and continually building yourself. But with that being said, I just would like to say that I'd like to thank everyone again for the invitation. I'm assuming time is of the time to wrap it up. Yeah. I would just like to say thank you once again, Asante Sana, to of course the organizers, to all the few other panelists, to everyone who tuned in. We could definitely continue the dialogue. We're all accessible. So let's continue this. And I want to wish everyone all the best and to stay safe during these times, and to also very much remember our mental health.
Indeed, that is so true. Mental health is so important. Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you. Zoe, over to you.
Thank you, Kayshell. Thank you so much, Miss Aisha, for those enthusiastic last words. Now we'd like to invite the beautiful Miss Cheryl Noel to lead us in positive affirmations. So, Miss Noel, straight over to you.
Good evening, everyone. It's such an honor to be a witness as an elder, to hear you young people. I'm just like, you've always been I've always believed that you were the ones we've been waiting for. And in listening to you, I feel so blessed. And you're already so far ahead of the game, at your young ages, and you already know the things I'm going to say. So I'm going to say these affirmations already knowing that but sometimes we just need a reminder of the things that we know. So here goes. The first one is that you can breathe. You can breathe. Your ancestors breathed in the fetid air of those hulls for months on those ships, and you carry their DNA. You will always be able to breathe, because breathing is life and breathing is hope. So every day I can breathe, okay? Do not be deterred, be determined. Do not be deterred, be determined. Sometimes, and here's the mental health part, I must rest when I need to, so that I can take care of my mental health. I must rest when I need to. Taking a moment for yourself is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of self-awareness. It's a sign of self-awareness. You must know who you are and when you need to breathe. Some people can run for 26 miles and then they can run an extra one. And some people can sprint for 100 meters. We all are created differently, but we all have a purpose, okay? The other one that I want you to really, really get within your spirit is that you are the spiritual giants of those yet to come. We always talk about how we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we talk about the ancestors and the greats and our heroines. But you, right as you are, must keep in your spirit that you are the spiritual giants of those yet to come. Because sometimes when you cannot take another step for yourself, you can take another step for your children. You can take another step for your grandchildren one day. You can take another step for a line of African, of children of African descent that you may never meet. But because you lived and because you did, they will too, and they'll do even more. So please remember that you are the giants of those yet to come. You are the spiritual giants of those yet to come. And the other one that I want to talk about is being, I don't want to say you're your sister's keeper, but you're your sister's greatest supporter, and together you can create the world in which you all want to live. Because I think sometimes if you say you define yourself by in response to what other people think you are, or you behave in the world in response to what other people say you are or think you are. So you confine yourself, or you wrap your hair, or you do something different so that you don't offend the other because they have the power. But you have the power. You do have the power. And collectively, that's why they can't handle you, because collectively they know that if you only take a hold of your power, if you only tap into that thing, collectively, you will take your space at the head of the world, because you are the beginning of everything. Everything started in Africa. The humanity started in Africa. Everything came out of you. So why don't you have power? You do. So remember that you can create right now, or you can begin to create right now. I'm sure some of you are already doing it, because I'm hearing you. You're already creating the world in which you want to live, in which you deserve to live. So whenever it gets to be too much, or they're coming at you in ways that just exhaust you, take a moment and remember that you are already more than enough. You have everything inside of you that you need to live a life that is powerful, that is as soft as you want it to be, as strong as you want it to be, as loving as you want it to be, as free as you want it to be. Take your space at the head of the line, and do not be deterred ever. Be determined. God bless you always. I love all of you. You make me so proud to be an elder. Thank you. I put a timer so that I wouldn't go over my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Noel, for those positive words, and thank you to all our speakers. I also want to extend thank you to David Adams for his assistance with our 1-minute video presentations. Over the next few days, we will post the full-length video on our social media. So follow us on Facebook at IDPADA-G Youth Movement and on Instagram. See you there.
Please tune in on Saturday at 7 p.m. for a special edition of Spill the Facts, and next week Thursday at 7 p.m. for our discussion on confronting anti-Blackness in 2020, the African male experience. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and please stay safe. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.